Welcome back to News and Views. We're going to be turning our attention to Syria now, where trials against figures linked to the former Assad regime are underway. This is as the country continues to grapple with its past. There's a name that caught my attention. I think a lot of people who've been following Syrian politics and current affairs for some time now, Atef Najib. He's a former senior security official and cousin of the ousted President Bashir al-Assad. And he's among those that are facing accountability. He has reportedly been sentenced to death. This over his alleged role in abuses during the early stages of the 2011 uprising. Najib's case is part of a wider effort to address alleged crimes committed under the former regime. But what does this wave of trials mean for justice, for accountability, and I think most importantly, for reconciliation and the reimagining of a new Syria? And joining us to try and answer some of those questions is Dr. Rahaf Aldoughli, lecturer in the Middle East and North African Studies at Lancaster University. Doc, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
No, pleasure is all ours. I want to kickstart this conversation with the basics for our listeners maybe who are not familiar with the figure that is Atef Najib. Why is he so significant when it comes to understanding the origins of the Syrian uprising back in 2011?
First of all, Atef Najib is known to be a cousin of Assad, and in the early days of the uprising, especially when it started in Daraa with a group of young children who were detained by the security forces, Atef Najib was responsible for torturing these kids, and actually the detention of these kids were like the spark or the flame that ignited the Syrian revolution in many cities. So it's more of symbolic, and Atef Najib actually tortures against Syrians has not started with the Syrian uprising in 2011, but he's a notorious figure that is known for years and decades in detaining and torturing Syrians. So the symbolism is there, especially in Daraa, where the first flame of the uprising started in that small city where they challenged Bashar al-Assad as a dictator. So it's very symbolic to have him at least having this kind of accountability for victims of the early days of the Syrian uprising.
I want to come to these trials that we've been seeing unfolding in Syria for the last couple of months now. How significant are they, and do you think they could be the beginning, the start, of Syria finally trying to shed, I think, decades of the Assad family and the regime, and just how brutal that time has been, and I don't know, to start heal and maybe unite the country despite everything that's happening around them?
Well, there are two things here. First of all, for millions of Syrians who experienced detention, torture, disappearance, displacement, and the loss of family members under Assad rules, and especially Atef Najib, this ruling carries enormous symbolic significance. However, we need to be cautious here, not to say that we should be careful not to equate sentencing Atef Najib or Assad with the transitional justice. The current authority, I have my personal criticism of the current authorities, how they are processing transitional justice, because transitional justice cannot be reduced. Cannot be reduced to the punishments of one individual. However central he was to the system, the violence of the former regime was institutional and involved extensive networks. And especially with the current authorities, we have seen the rebranding of certain figures that were accomplice in torturing Syrians, that they are now still in Syria, and they have been normalized back to the scene, like Mohammed Hamsho, Fadi Saqr, and so many other names. So even to some Syrians who are critical or not kind of has lost the trust in this new authority, that's not enough. It might be emotionally enough and morally. However, it cannot be equated to a full comprehensive transitional justice that should seek truth, should seek clarification of the fate of the disappeared, access to the archives and evidence, the repatriations of victims, and more of institutional reform. So there's also an important question of legitimacy. Justice after authoritarian collapse must not appear selective or become a mechanism through which the new political order prosecute its former enemies while overlooking violations committed by actors associated with the victorious side. So this is something, there is a big questions in the minds of some Syrians that asking, what's about the violations and the violence committed by victorious factions so far? By the factions that have also committed atrocities against the Kurds during the long 14 years war. We have seen silence over that side, and we have to be careful here that over 100 armed groups that emerged during the Syrian war, and these armed factions are now, most of them are now in central commanders in the new army, and also committed atrocities after the fall of Assad in the coast and Sweden. And we hear nothing about how accountability will be held. So despite the importance or the significance of this ruling against Atef Najib and even sentencing Assad in absentia, still there are big questions of whether the judicial system will be sovereign, will be not accomplice or kind of appeasing the authority. So it's a question of the independence of the judicial system more than anything else. Because if you know the beginning or the early symbolic kind of challenge that the Syrians called in the streets of Syria in early 2011, it was about injustice, corruption, political representation, political pluralism. So these were the main questions that pushed Syrians to the streets. So we need, with this new authority, to remind it that, okay, that's not enough to select certain notorious figures and say, like, look, we are holding these accountable, because there are other questions for Syrians to build the trust between the authority and Syrians, to see that, okay, this process is transparent, this process is not selective, this process is not to legitimize and more or less consolidate the power of this authority.
And I think very, very important points that you're making there. And I'm just thinking to myself, listening to you speak, and not trying to be pessimistic or anything, because I think any of us that has been following Syria for the last couple of years and seeing and reading about some of those atrocities that were committed during the Assad regime would want a positive outcome after this transitional justice cases that we've been seeing post-Assad. Yeah. But is there possibility that these trials could deepen the divisions that are already existing in the country? You spoke about what looks like double standards between the various factions and how they're being judged. Could there be a negative side to it?
Definitely, there is always consequences to that. There might be these kind of selective kind of ruling or accountability holding. It might create more divisions and factionalism. And there is one thing that, especially when a country gets out of a long war period, the new authority needs to build the trust, and this is very important. Trust cannot be built with these kind of symbolic gestures. We need to be, because Syrians are not kind of naive. They have lived through dictatorship. They have lived through wars. They have lived through regional instrumentalism. So even when America comes and say, like, like, okay, al-Shara is a great leader, Syrians are not going to be naive enough and say, oh well, if America is, we know that America has certain interest in the region, has certain interest in al-Shara, and they are acting out of their main interest or what they want. So Syrians are not kind of, again, naive to believe everything that's being told by the authority. So this might create more divisions rather than unity. However, I should say here that with the majority, and sorry to say, like the majority Sunnis who were subject to extensive torture, and I have heard it from so many other communities, heterogeneous communities, or other communities like belong to Christians and the Druze and the Alawites, they kind of admit that the Syrian Sunnis have way far of being subject to torture and more grievances. So they share, and they have, even with the Druze who have been just subject to massacres in July last year, they have admitted that this ruling, if this can help Sunni Syrians to feel at ease with their emotions, with what's happened, that's good for Syrians. But again, there are big questions here, because the Druze are starting to ask, where is the accountability that should be held against the central commanders who committed atrocities against us? And like others are also the Sunnis who were living in northern Syria, and they were also subject to torture by HTS, now the ruling authority in Syria. They are asking these questions. We still have 60 prisons in Idlib completely closed, that we don't know anything about them, and we are still hearing stories on daily basis of detention because of expressing such criticism against the new authority. Of course, it's not as repressive as Assad was, and as but still there are and let's remember that the Assad regime under Hafez al-Assad did not start completely authoritarian. Like, it took them few years until the regime felt it's cornered, and then the violence became more extensive. So I wouldn't say, it's still early days, and I'm still cautiously optimistic to see that there is still a chance for the new authority to build Syrian institutions, because this is the most important part. We don't need this kind of symbolic kind of that we are doing great. And also, I have to say that the Western flirting with the new authority is also have consequences on Syrians inside who are trying to criticize or trying to build Syria as well. And they are very they are also held more their position in having in participating in building Syria is shrinking more and more, because they feel that this authority is being given the full green light. The engagement with the new authorities being not at all under any conditions with protecting human rights and ensuring non-detention and ensuring pluralism. Because if we are back to square one, where corruption is also still there, the economy is still bad, and also there is another thing that Syrians are feeling, that there is many reports are coming that saying like al-Shara is selling Syria. And I don't want to go into that side, but we don't know anything of where these kind of treaties are made with Western countries or with regional countries, and this is very it's okay. Not all millions of Syrians do care about these things, but we will see their consequences in the few years to come, where they will feel that it's back to square one, where only we have a small segments of Syrian becoming very, very rich, where the other Syrians becoming more and more poor. So it's there in a few years, I think, where the materialization of this governance or the way the new authority governs Syria will be under the challenge, or under kind of being tested.
Well, they have it, Dr. Rahaf Aldoughli. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the show. And I hope we chat again soon. I think what
Thank
we're
you.
witnessing in Syria is going to require a lot more unpacking than what we had time for this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
There you go. Dr. Rahaf Aldoughli, lecturer in the Middle East and North African Studies out at Lancaster University, helping us understand the significance of the Atef Najib case and serious difficult search for accountability. This is all the while there's a lot of scrutiny for President Ahmed al-Shara. There are conversations and concerns that maybe Syria might have replaced Assad's authoritarian kind of rule, which was very, very brutal for a very, very long time, with a new form of centralized power. But watch it all unfold and keep a keen eye on it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.